Welcome, welcome. Thank you for spending this time with us. As we get started today, I just have to say, I feel very lucky to be up here with these three. I mean, these are three people who have taught me the absolute most about the work we are going to discuss today, so I feel like I'm in a very, very fortunate place. I want to start, as I like to start many conversations, with the patented DBR 10-second introduction, in which we are each going to share our names, how we describe ourselves, and an affirmation, a belief, a provocation perhaps. So Daniel, because you invented it, show us how it's done.
Okay, I'll try my best. Hello, my name is Daniel Bernard Roumain. I'm a Black Haitian American composer. And by composing, I mean the farming and framing of ideas.
Yes. Garrett, let's move to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Garrett McQueen. I identify as a bodhisattva of the earth who plays bassoon, who produces podcast and radio content, and who has the deep, great pleasure of working with Melissa as the Director of Artist Equity at the American Composers Orchestra.
Love it. And Inti, off to you.
Yeah, my name is Inti figgis-vizueta, and I guess I self-describe as a two-spirit Andean composer from lots of places all around the world, and I believe in the power of conversation and sound to get us closer to one another.
Fantastic. And I am Melissa Ngan. I am President and CEO of the American Composers Orchestra. I am a Brazilian-Cambodian recovering flutist, and I believe that creative acts can transform the world. So today we're here to talk about healthy collaborative relationships between composers and large institutions. And why are we talking about large institutions in particular? Not because they're the most important, but because they occupy a very particular place in the ecosystem of classical music, new music, art music, all of the ways we want to describe that. And this is a really important conversation for me personally because I come from the land of new music, chamber music ensembles, and arrived in the land of orchestra about 18 months ago, and I'm still figuring out where the furniture is. So this is a good way for me to share and for this whole panel to share what we're learning about how we can create the best possible environment. So that is the what. Now we get to the how. So today we're going to cover how we make invitations, how we make that first introduction, what happens when you arrive, who is there to greet you, what kind of support is there, how is the table set for that collaboration, and of course we want to talk about the structure. What is the time, what is the money, what is the space that is created in order for us to arrive at a place of collaboration and co-learning. So we've talked about what, which is the relationship, how we are accomplishing these things, and to me the most important part of it all is the why. Right? We all have to understand why we are entering this space together. And we have so much rich conversation over these few days and the many reasons why we are here. And I just want to say every organization should fully understand why they're inviting artists of color in particular, to create in their spaces and to create spaces with them. They may be thinking about representation. They may be thinking about justice. They may be thinking about belonging. But to me, I enter the space just from the belief that diverse voices equal beautiful work. So I do that because I want to make beautiful work, period, end of discussion. As I think about that, there's always this image that comes back to my mind. During the pandemic, I spent way too much time watching Netflix. I don't know if that's true of any of you. And there was this documentary by Richard Attenborough, and there's this particular image that I will never forget. It was basically the edge of the natural rainforest. And on one side, you see the creation, every possible species in perfect harmony with one another. And on the other side of that line, you see perfectly placed rows of palm trees. That's monoculture. That's what happens when big institutions and money get involved, when something gets picked and commoditized. So as we think about how that shows up in the arts, we may have picked a certain style of art making that we put a lot of money behind, that we created, in fact, institutes of higher education and training programs and certification around, that we created opera companies and orchestras and major concert halls to be able to support, and philanthropy around that process. But on the other side of the line, in fact, in our very neighborhood, there is this rich musical biodiversity that has always been there. So it's helpful for us to recognize that when we talk about diversity of style and aesthetic, as much as we talk about culture and gender, all of these things, we're not doing something new. We're actually coming back to the way it was, right? We're thinking about a time when this music making, which has always been part of every indigenous culture on earth, and has always been part of how we pass tradition, pass language, pass story, build community, heal the body, engage the spirit, that has always been a part of us. So we are remembering. We're literally bringing parts of ourselves back together when we do that. So as we talk about that process of remembering, I want to invite Garrett first to answer my first question, which is, we spend so much time thinking about how we define things. And one of the things that I find most special about the dialogue that you've brought forward is this idea of the American classical. And I'd love to know how you think about that.
Sure, thank you. This is something that I've dedicated much of my life to, helping people reimagine not only what classical music is, but what classical music is in the context of who we are today here in this part of the world. When I hear that phrase, classical music, I think about a tradition that's twofold. One that celebrates the now and the new, and one that really engages culture. If we want to, for 2 seconds, center Western Europe, that's what we're talking about when we were talking about symphonies by Beethoven and concertos by Mozart, really a celebration of the new and now, and an engagement of the culture that hits the musical heartstrings of the people that music was written for. So if we travel across time and travel across the world, we see different iterations of that. Classical music in the context of the Indian subcontinent is very different than in the context of Africa or Japan or South America. So what does that mean for us here living now in this time? My belief is that American classical must be recontextualized as an art form that, again, speaks to the now and engages culture, engages our own musical traditions and our own musical histories. So what does that look like specifically? When I hear the phrase classical music, I first and foremost think about the spiritual as our early music. I think about blues as American classical. If we want to use that phrase American and expand it beyond the United States, I think of mariachi as classical. All of this to say that by celebrating the now and really, making beautiful music work and celebrating diversity, we really have to understand that the way that we think about classical music is not really the way we should think about classical music. It's the result of conditioning, it's the result of colonization, and it's the result of a tradition that is not ours. So my goal as a professional is to help orchestras, to help composers, and everyone in between really speak and write and perform their truth in a renewed way of really understanding that classical music in our American context can and must really speak to our experiences.
That is such a beautiful frame. Yes, please applaud. Such a beautiful frame for today's conversation. And speaking of framing, I really believe that every collaboration, every partnership gets defined at the very first invitation. It's how we set the stage for what it is going to be. It's how we set the stage for what success looks like. And Daniel, I want to come to you. I'd love to kind of get a sense from you as to what you feel an effective invitation looks like, right? How can institutions, particularly large ones, make an invitation to you that helps you to feel like you are being invited to create art that is an authentic extension of your practice?
Well, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I'm so glad that all of you are here, particularly so much of one of my first invitations was through ACO as a Whitaker New Music Reading Composer winner way back in, I don't know, maybe 2000, maybe early, I can't remember, 2001. And then as their composer in residence, Van Leer, composer in residence. And so there was a lot of work there with ACO that was one of my first invitations into the orchestral classical music world. That money got me to Harlem and sustained me first 2 years in New York City, actually. It was like $15,000, I think. Transparency, right? That was a lot of money in 2000. I mean, for me, that was a lot of money. And it's a lot of money. So I think that invitation is a kind of affirmation of trust, of a kind of contract between a place and a person, right? So I think wherever an organization is, wherever that place is, I think a person, an artist, can often come in and kind of transform it at its best. So I do think you in your previous panel showed a graphic, a chart, that showed a kind of monolithic view of an organization. No diversity of people or humans. It was jarring, actually. I live in 3 places. I live in New York, here. I live in Boston. I live in Tempe, Arizona. I think also about how an invitation can speak to safety and can speak to, in some ways, our better selves. Sorry, I need to be honest just for 1 second. So I was trying to be cool. I'm trying to be cool right now, but I can't. So can I just, I'm trying to be an administrator with all these wonderful artists. Can I just be an artist for a second? Just, is that cool? Okay, let me just be an artist. As an artist, what Bill T. Jones has taught me is, let me just take you into my mind right now. Is that okay? It'll just take about 30 seconds. I'm thinking about that clock is ticking. And it's ticking, and in a few hours, a video is going to be released. And I know I am with Black Joy, but it's so hard to be in Black Joy when I just watched in the hallway Tyree Nichols' mother talk about she suddenly felt her stomach hurting her. And it was the exact moment her son, Xavier, her son, 6 feet, 3 inches tall, 150 pounds, I'm 5'10", and 185. And 5 black men and I am thinking about Black Joy. But here's the thing. You know what invitation I want? I want my local police department in New York and Boston and Tempe to invite me in. A pas de deux between a composer and a cop, both wearing our skin. You dig? That's what I want to do today. That's what I'm thinking about today. Because nobody was thinking about these things when Tyree was calling out for his mama, right? And I see you, Curtis, with your violin in hand, your weapon of choice, calling out, and I knew your mama. And that's where my mind is at, you know? So yes, Black Joy, but it's very hard sometimes to focus on Black Joy or even an invitation when the institutions and the places around us, there's a sense of privilege, but you're reduced to prey. And then you pray. So that's the invitation that I will force. Actionable item, after today's panel, sometime on my phone, I'm going to call out the Tempe Police Department and say, hey, you know what just happened today? I think we are both protecting and serving the same audience. Why don't you invite me in?
No, it's beautiful. I mean, what you're talking about is civic practice, right? You're talking about the idea that artists can be invited by non-arts organizations to address a community-defined vision. That's what you're talking about. And that's a powerful thing because we as artists, we don't just serve audiences. We're here to create a work that will encourage us to see ourselves and one another in different ways, and that in fact requires the participation of one another in order to become real, whether that participation comes through the imagination required to observe and listen to a piece, or maybe it's participation in the form of co-creation, in the form of music making, movement, as we were just talking about. You know, so I think it's beautiful that that's the invitation you want, and I hope it's the invitation you get. Absolutely. So Inti, I want to come to you now. one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled to have you here is you've thought so much about what it means to create a generative space for music making. And a lot of that space up until recently has been in the context of smaller ensembles. And now you're translating that into larger ensembles. So before we get to the big ensemble space, I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit about what a generative space looks like to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, for me, I the daughter of organizers, community organizers in Washington, D.C. I grew up going to predominantly Black and Latinx spaces in Washington, D.C., especially kind of around this era of really massive and rapid gentrification, you know, particularly around Shaw and U Street and, you know, all of that. And kind of growing up in those spaces, I always kind of saw knowledge and saw participation in a process of collaborative research and collaborative kind of answer seeking as a way of empowering everybody in a space with both investment in a process of kind of co-learning and collaborative learning, as well as a way of empowering those who don't feel comfortable to speak, who don't feel like they have the words, to be the ones giving the testimony. And I think that this is this kind of difference between advocacy and organizing as a, you know, just a very kind of general. And for me, I approached composition pretty early, I approached composition pretty late, but I was kind of trying to figure out, like, what is my place in this space? In a kind of practice where I was supposed to have all the answers, like, all the time. And I was like, I don't have all the answers all the time, and I don't really want to front like I have all the answers all the time. And so kind of coming up with a practice that felt like it could integrate those roots and that kind of philosophy of approach and of cultivation of people's voices felt like something I could bring into music making, bring into composition, bring into facilitation, and maybe create a bridge between what I saw as a process of kind of empowerment and collaborative learning and collaborative unlearning, and kind of bring that into a musical process. And so that did start off kind of in small chamber ensembles, coming up with different strategies for asking people how to listen, asking people how to all orient around the same object and see the thing that they see in the object, and not be kind of afraid of needing to always come together on just one answer, right? Like, because it's never just one answer. Like, it's always like a million answers. And like, asking people feels necessary for people to participate. And so that, again, with that sense of invitation, it's kind of, what is the way in which we can invite the internal of musicians who I think, you know, have incredible imaginations cultivated over long periods of time, you know, in relationship with their instrument and in relationship with the past and in relationship with their own community. How can that become a part of a compositional process, a part of a final piece of music that can be reflective of many instead of just reflective of one? And so moving from that smaller medium to a larger one has been interesting. It's been definitely a learning curve, and just, you know, kind of focusing all this up.
I love that. And one thing that I want to unpack in what was just said is this idea of feeling like you needed to know the answer all the time. I mean, any of us who were trained in classical music know that to come into a room and not have everything nailed perfect feels like a sign of either failure or disrespect in a rehearsal room. But actually, music making is in many cases a process of being willing to say, I don't know, you know? And a beginner's mindset that allows for growth. When we know that everything, we've basically stopped learning. So it's helpful for us to have composers in this space who encourage us to test those limitations that we were trained to have, you know? And I think I'll just share my secret agenda. The reason why I work with composers is because everything I've ever learned about creativity, I've learned from composers, and I'm a better human for it. So I'm very glad to be in this space. So I want to just come now to another moment where I think that every institution, we grow up as our people grow up. Every institution is made of people, right? So when we have people within our institutions who believe that their path towards advancement is knowing all the answers and proving what a great job they did, we as institutions can sometimes feel the pressure to always believe we've done things right or know the answers too. And there's a problem with that, which is that we don't. So I want to actually unpack something which I think every institution should do. Moments when we didn't get it right and what we learned from the process. And Inti, you've been involved with ACO for a long time in a variety of capacities. The first time was through our Earshot readings, I want to say, yes? And so Earshot, for those of you who might not know, is a national suite of composer advancement initiatives. Our readings programs typically take place over a couple of days, 2 to 4 days, and invite a score that is fully finished for an orchestra to read, whether it's ours or another orchestra across the country. And I'd like you to share a little bit about what that experience was. You won't hurt my feelings. And also, then we'll get into what we learned and what we did moving forward. So let's start with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for, I mean, again, the invitation to not only be positive is a kind of, I think, a necessary thing sometimes for even, spaces like this, and as well as all creative spaces. Yeah, so with ACO, I'd been aware of your kind of, I don't know, like, what is the word? Emerging composer opportunities, a big umbrella. And I had realized that, like, looking at the requirements for it, it required only traditional notation as part of what was going to be submitted. And as someone who works almost entirely not in that, I was like, well, why can't we? Like, this is supposed to be about cultivating contemporary music. I guess I felt a deep disconnect between the idea of contemporary as only conservative, traditional, whatever. And so, of course, I reached out, and I received actually a very positive response from Aiden Feldkamp back in the day, and ended up being accepted to the readings with actually the knowledge that it was the first score of its kind to be accepted to the readings. Which is always it's always a scary thing when you're the first in that way, because you kind of know going in that the structures that are built there are just not built for you, and are not built for the way in which you're kind of trying to engage creativity, engage personhood, and all that in music. And so the readings ended up being pretty difficult for me. There was not a lot of sympathy, I felt like, with the orchestra towards how I was approaching music. I felt like I was giving very simple asks, and kind of actually just like the most kind of filtered and basic version of a notation, but ran into a bunch of problems that, of course, like through my own lack of experience working with orchestras, I didn't know that it was a problem, right? Like, one thing was an instruction that was a sentence. That's way too long. That's way too much to expect an orchestral musician to read, as I found out. And so, that kind of compounded throughout a piece that had quite a few sentences, and ended up being, an experience that was a little bit discouraging, but having experienced a lot of discouragement in my life, it just kind of affirmed the idea for me that there was kind of capacity to grow, as well as a goodwill and an interest in growth. And I think that that's what made me pick up the phone the next time that you called.
For sure. And I also want to thank Aiden, who is not here today, but who really took ACO from where it was to where Garrett picks up the ball and takes it from there in terms of equity. And the fact that your score was accepted was already one step, but now we have to arrive at what happens when you get there, right? So it's interesting to me when you were talking about the experience of what was acceptable in an orchestral context. A lot of composer advancement programs, or training programs, as many of them are called, invite the orchestra to teach the composer how to write for orchestra and align with the guidelines and really color within the lines so that the work can be done, right? And there's a certain efficiency that comes with being in a large institution, but efficiency and creativity don't always fall in line, as we know. So I remember hearing this story. I also remember the first few months that I was in the role, we did a partnership with the Tucson Symphony Orchestra, and they were looking specifically for composers with ties to the Southwest, and they also wanted a larger proportion of Native composers in the program. And what we found through Earshot, even after much intentional recruiting, we identified these composers, but very few of them had ready-to-go orchestral scores for many variety of reasons, including that that's just not how they make art, right? Some of them. And so it led me to go back in the archives and say, you know what? One of the best things that ACO ever did was this program called Collaboratory, where instead of submitting a score, composers submit an idea, and that idea is developed over the course of a year. And it's an artist-led process. We talk to the composer about what they're looking to explore, and we intentionally choose things that would have a really difficult time coming to fruition in a traditional rehearsal environment where you might have 25 minutes to rehearse a 15-minute piece. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that. So Inti, we wanted to come back to you first when coming back to this piece and coming back to this way of working, because we knew you needed another shot to make this music happen in the way that it deserves to happen. And so we designed a series of workshops, and I wonder if you can talk about the process, like what we did, what each step of the way, what we learned from one another in that. So much to say.
Totally, and again, the reach out and the invitation again to this process was so extremely important and helpful, and made, again, I think even one voice in that way opens the possibility for that being a kind of path that can open in the future, and that often is how it works for composers. Like, just you need actually the recording before you get before you get the actual thing. You need the thing already done, and so being able, that just creates that space for the future. And so for Collaboratory, I had a lot of ideas. Just too many. But like the concept of really trying to get and hone a way of bringing in the kind of creative choice making and voices of the instrumentalists and musicians that we're working with felt extremely core, and the process that we had outlaid was one of a kind of scaling model where we were working from a string quintet into a kind of chamber orchestra into the kind of final full version of everything, and being able to just workshop ideas along the way, have kind of multiple check-ins, not just kind of have this very almost anonymous feeling where you work on something for a year and then you send an email and then you never see it again until you kind of arrive. This idea of kind of consistently checking in, of having ideas appear one way and then have the space and time to be able to transform was extremely helpful.
For sure, and I think we actually have some photos of the first workshop. So this was with a string quintet before we even got to orchestral stage. And this was not, I have a score, it was just, I have some ideas, let's try them out. And in the next photo, what you'll see is Inti's basically playing through. So if we could go to the next slide. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this was like one of the most beautiful moments for me, just observing this session, seeing you and Miho, the violinist, trading the instrument back and forth so that ideas could be demonstrated. I remember you and I had a very particular conversation after this session, which was I was seeing a lot of notes on a staff that first time, and I thought to myself, the last score I saw of yours was music for shapeshifters, and there were no notes at all. Is this really what you want to write? Do you remember your answer? It had to do with time and being with the orchestra. Like, I don't have the time really to do a piece that looks like that.
Agreed. And I mean, again, there's so much, I think of, one of the common ways of kind of framing composition and music and notation and scores is that of vessels that we kind of build for people. And depending on, it can be a really small vessel and really kind of, even if it's a gesture, it's something that someone can interpret in such a way, and so they can put a little bit of themselves. But when we start to to scale out those vessels or have them try to activate different parts of memory or different parts of creativity, it takes a long time. It
Yeah.
takes a long time for people to feel, well, not only for it to create a musical result, but for initially for people to feel like they know how to connect with both the notation and with themselves, which is what I'm asking, and it's a really difficult ask.
It is a difficult ask, and I could feel the hesitation, and I remember saying to you, write the music you want to write. We'll find the space we need to find, right? And so the next workshop we did was around 25 people. We had a conductor there for the first time. What was that experience like? What were the things we learned and had to happen between that and the next rehearsal?
Yeah, so for that particular experience, I had kind of taken your invitation and gone quite far actually, and created something that was extremely visual. The piece is called Seven Sides of Fire, and so each kind of notation was a different, highly graphic kind of graphic representation of fire with some material in there. And I think for that one particularly, I really wanted more kind of active shaping from the conductor, but what ended up happening was we just didn't really have time to have the kind of communication, conversation, and understanding that would have made the time in front of the orchestra, I guess, work in that way. But again, it's like, I think for me, it's like always when music is being made from something I made, I learned something. And I definitely learned, quite a bit about how confusion sometimes doesn't always make the kind of, clearest thing appear, but then being able to kind of tweak things here and there, have it be a really kind of dialogic process, which was, again, something that just doesn't really happen in almost any orchestral space I've ever been part of or even witnessed, of a kind of active dialogue between conductor and composer versus a kind of just like a check-in, And so even there, I think there was a way in which I kind of came away with I was like, okay, this is really conservative, this is really far, maybe it needs to be between these two.
Right. And, I can say I've been in the rehearsal room as a flutist, as a coach. This was one of my first times in the rehearsal room as an administrator. And I had a different role in this process, which was basically to see where were the pain points and what structure could I create that would sort of allow that music to flourish in the ways it needed to. So we had some really good conversations about what the role of the conductor needed to be. It was also very interesting to see, we had some musicians who looked at the score and were really excited, and some for whom I just saw a brief widening of the eyeballs because people have varying degrees of comfort with improvisation and that kind of music making. So the piece of it we're not talking about today is who are the musicians, period, and the work that has to be done to stack the deck with musicians who have that kind of fearless skill set, right? So that work was being done in tandem with all of this in the background. But I have to say with total gratitude, our next step in the process was to work with Ngan, who is a hero of all things. And she had a conversation with me about what we saw in that last session, what would be her role in the process. And she subsequently spent something like 2 hours with you, right?
2.5.
2.5. Just really designing what that rehearsal process should look like. So we've got a couple of photos of the performance itself at Carnegie Hall with Ngan on the podium, Ataka Quartet in front of the orchestra, being the best possible Sherpas for this forward. And in the last photo, of course, you see the relationship that was built between the two of you is really what made this happen. I'll say that for me, it was such a proud moment to see ACO as an orchestra behave like a small chamber ensemble. I'm constantly interested in what it takes for us to behave like a big organization when it matters and like a little group when it matters. So I want to thank you for one of the most proud and emotionally fulfilling moments for me in the time that I've been at ACO. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Garrett, I want to come to you because, this process of learning is something that you lead for our organization, and what kind of support, I've talked about what my role was on that day, but really it's your role fully to support composers as they walk the path with us. So I'm curious what you've learned about support, structure, money, all of the things that are required to make the thing go.
Sure, I'll begin by just offering a very short anecdote. So, among the programs that ACO fuels are the Toolman Commissions. So, there's a foundation that selects from our earshot cohorts women and non binary composers to commission for new works for a lead orchestra and a consortium of orchestras to perform the same work. So, Melissa and I had the pleasure of witnessing one of those premieres last week, about 10 days ago, with the New York Philharmonic, a premiere of a work by a composer named Wang Lu. So after the performance, after the entire concert is done, we walk out to the lobby, and Wang Lu is there, receiving congratulations from everyone. It almost chokes me up thinking about it. She sees Melissa and I, and she reaches out to me and just gives me just the strongest, tightest embrace of gratitude. I bring up that anecdote because I think a part of the tradition of classical music that has been put on us is dehumanizing the creation of this music and dehumanizing even the performance of this music. By really engaging that human moment, feeling her gratitude in that moment for the work that we do to give her the opportunity to have this proud moment. That's really what fuels me every single day. My background is in activism and content creation, so I'm really every day stretching myself and challenging myself as an arts administrator to stay within the box as I need to. But what I've learned to really center is, again, that human aspect of the music making. Every morning when my alarm goes off and I don't really feel like going into my studio and starting the computer to start the day's work, I think about all of these composers who just want a chance, who just want an opportunity. So through those emotions, I make sure that every time I'm in front of a potential partner orchestra that I'm really making the case, not for ACO and not even necessarily for new music, but for the humans who make this music. That informs the way I systematize my own work. That informs the way that I engage conversations of funding. People who listen to my content know that money and capitalism I'm always shaky about, but if I have to engage that to really platform these musicians, that's exactly what I need to do. So basically, I think all arts institutions really need to think about the human behind this music. And when we make those human connections and center those human connections, we are centering personhood. Now, and I can preach about this a lot, but when we center personhood, we're getting back to my original point about a reframing of American classical music. We're giving composers and music creators the opportunity to really manifest themselves, their perspectives, their lived experiences through the medium of orchestral music. So as I personally continue to move forward, I really just think about, again, the human behind the music and making sure that I'm doing everything I can to create as many opportunities for myself in the future to get that warm, tight embrace that I got from Wang Lu.
I love that so much. Garrett, we're insanely grateful to you. And also for rumbling with the questions around money. I mean, frankly, so much of our time in institutions is spent figuring out how those resources will be allocated. And of course, your balance sheet is a statement of your values, right? So it's important, especially when we're doing work that is to support artists, that we're putting as many resources there as possible, because frankly, what you prioritize, you should itemize. So I want to come to Daniel. We started with you in the introduction, and I want to come back to you now because one of the things I most admire is that for such a long time, you have put your identity forward as part of your artistry and encouraged others to do the same. And I want to talk about that because I think a lot of artists, particularly perhaps at the start of their career, think about and struggle with how much of themselves they can bring to their art, how much of their human selves they can bring to work in a variety of contexts or to the stage. I'm curious if you can share what that has looked like for you at various stages in your career and how it may have changed, perhaps.
Well, I'm 52 years old. I started playing the violin when I was 5 years old. Small town called Margate, Florida, not Pompano Beach, not Fort Lauderdale, not Miami. It was Margate. About 49,000 people. It was Margate Elementary School. If you were the best violinist at our Christmas concert, you played Hatikva. And the Margate Strings, there were about 100 of us in a gymnasium cafeteria performing arts center in our elementary school. And I remember Mr. Miller said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, this year's a violinist who's going to play Hatikva is little Danny Roumain. And I made my way to the front of the stage, big afro, can you believe it? Black shoes, and everybody played a full-size violin. And I started playing Hatikva, and I looked out, and there was this white woman who was South Florida, a senior citizen, and she started crying, and I thought I must be really good. And next to her was my mother, and she started crying. And I'm looking at them, and I thought, I must be incredible. And I dug in, and I stood up even taller, and there's this whole section, it was South Florida, perspiring and crying and sweating. And I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that was my introduction into the performing arts, 5 years old. And I started playing piano because my sisters were dancers. And Miss Kathy, who was a former Rockette, one day heard me playing something over and over again. She said, if you can figure out how to write that down, I'll give you $5. I didn't know how to compose. So I had to go figure out from my Suzuki books how to translate it, because I wanted that $5. And I wrote it down, and I handed it to her. It was big letters. It probably looked really, big notes. And she gave me $5. And a week later, I heard her accompanist playing it. In my role as a proud board member for the League of American Orchestras and the Association of Performing Arts Presenters, APAP, we are really thinking about visioning for our institutions. We want to change. We are changing. My commissions now, proudly, are for the Lyric Opera of Chicago with Ann DeVere Smith as librettist in a new work, the Raleigh Civic Community Orchestra in a new work for spoken word artists and 2 violinists and cello, with the Albany Symphony and their Forgiveness Project, and a new work for spoken word artists and their orchestra, a new work for the New Jersey Symphony, and a singer, Becky Bass, and with words by Mark Bermuti Joseph. Those are the commissions that I have. And what's on my mind right now, the challenge of a sentence is, in this moment, I keep asking myself a question. What if John Cage were black? Because the piece I want to write, the piece I want to write started in conversations with Electra Stewart, started at the Harlem School of the Arts. The piece I want to write would mean I have a conversation with everybody in the orchestra, and I write them a letter by hand. And the piece happens at the performance. Every musician comes to their music stand, they open up their letter, and they start reading it. And what I wrote is what they play. The audience gets a letter. It's love letters, Black Joy. But here's the thing. I'm 52 years old, and I feel like my most creative self is met by my blackest self. Can they reconcile? What if John Cage were black? I get paid to write music, and I'm so afraid to go there because I don't know if they're going to take me seriously. Somebody gives you $20,000 and you wrote me a letter? What would the board say? What would the audience say? Where's the score? Write it down. You dig? Can my defiance, you talk about who I am, I'm still an angry black man, y'all, and I want to put that in a score, in a letter. But I'm coward. My cowardice takes over. Because I wonder, if I actually don't hand in a score, will they take me seriously? A sentence, I want to give them sentences, right? So that's what's lingering in my mind right now. Can I be my full creative self when my blackness gets in the way? You dig?
Wow. Thank you. And, this session is called Keeping Up with Composers for a reason, because my hope is that the courage of institutions keeps up with the courage of composers. So I love that. This is a great moment to be thinking about questions. So those of you who are watching us virtually, please go ahead and add your questions if you have not already. And if you are here in the room and have one, there's a microphone for your use. But are there any that are coming to us from online?
Hello, I'm Brianna Garcon. I'm the current engagement liaison, and there is one question that has been submitted anonymously on the Hopin app. It states, what advice do you have to young composers who don't really know where to begin? How do you start putting our ideas onto the page?
I'm going to throw this to our composers in the room. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. Well, I would say that you start with however you can communicate. Be those words at first, be those drawings, be them sketches, and anything in that regard is, our role as composers is to communicate sound. It's to communicate the organization of sound and time, however that occurs. And the way in which that happens at the most professional level, and the way that happens, in your garage, these are they are not as far as I think we are told that they are. And actually, beginning to cultivate a kind of creative practice with sound can happen notationally. It can happen in a digital audio workstation. It can happen with your friends. It can happen in your community. It can happen anywhere, as long as you are engaging sound and looking to grow and looking to make more and more and more. And so I would say for any young composer starting, just figure out what makes your heart sing, what makes what makes your ears pop, what is kind of bringing you that energy and that joy that you feel like that you can put into something that then the next time someone touches it, the next time you touch it, it maintains that. It's this kind of creating almost that sound in the future.
I would say for me, creating and composing is both dreaming and defiance. I'm really stuck on words. I think that there's a design element here. In my own teaching, I don't use the word teacher or students. I use the word contributors. We're all contributors to a classroom and a world of ideas. Let's extend that. One of the things I'll ask contributors is replace the word rehearsal with another word. Jam, conversation, communion, attack, dinner. I want to go to a music dinner, right? A music rehearsal amongst an orchestra is one thing. We're all imagining it. A music dinner amongst an orchestra is something entirely different, right? Another application. Okay, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Think of the first few measures. Now think of the first few measures this way. Every member in the orchestra can play the measure at any tempo they want, as softly as possible, repeating each measure as many times as they want. Imagine what that sounds like. That's design. So now in this moment I'm thinking, okay, let me replace the word composer with designer. And that's even more interesting to me, because if the relationship of a composer is one of, I'm just going to invite you into a world of ideas, that's exciting to me. So how do you get started? Go on Instagram right now and write down what you would want an orchestra to do. That's a score. I love that.
And one thing I just want to make sure is said in this space in response to that question is that these ideas don't have to exclusively apply to the so-called young composer. One of the things that I take so much pride in as being a member of the ACO team is that our composer advancement initiatives do not have an age limit. We define emerging as composers who have had 3 or fewer performances. So institutions can define that in any way they choose. But I would encourage everyone to really think about the composers who are not 22 years old. Maybe there are people who have started composing after a full career. These same things can apply to you as well. Just wanted to make sure that was also stated.
Thank you. That's absolutely correct. And if you're checking out the Hopin app, you might see an article there that was written by Aidan Feldkamp a few years ago on the ACO site that's about inclusive eligibility criteria and how we've iterated that over time. So no age limit has certainly been a part of that. I'd love to invite your question.
Okay, I'm gonna put a mask down so everyone can hear me. My question is, have you ever faced a music block where you are composing a piece, but you're having a challenge of whether the idea is working or something technologically in terms of musicality isn't working?
I'm having one right now. Every time. Part of being 52 is I'm really trying to think about my body and just trying to stay in shape. And I'm discovering walking and also HIIT training, high intensity intervallic training. Is that right? So instead of running 30 minutes on a treadmill, you run for 1 minute as fast as you can, and then you rest. Then for 2 minutes as fast as you can, and then you rest. Okay. So I'll say this to you. I don't get writer's block, but if I did, this is what I do. I compose for 1 minute, then I stop. Not a sketch, not an idea. I compose for 1 minute, then I stop. Then I talk about it with someone for 1 minute. Then I compose for 2 minutes, stop. Then we talk about it for 2 minutes, and we keep going. When I've done this with other composers, other choreographers, other rap artists, visual arts, all different creatives, what we have found is that once you get to, I call it 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3. By the time you get to 30 for 30, whatever was blocking you is gone. So the lesson of muscular training is how are you training your imagination muscle? Because the danger is as you get older, that imagination muscles are going to get smaller. Proof of that, my son is 13. When he was 5, I'd say, Zachary, dance. You know what he would do? Point to someone in the room. Dance. You see? Right? It's just as, no, I don't mean to put you on the spot. But the point I'm getting is what happens? What makes the imagination atrophy and stop? So 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3. You dig? Mm-hmm. That's one way to flex that imagination muscle.
Yeah, I would say similarly, within that same vein of a kind of creative exercise that you can kind of hopefully engage in multiple ways over time is just also the form of what you want your musical idea to be on the page, if indeed you are using a page. I think one thing with all of that is that we have an incredible range of ways to notate that were gifted to us from the 50s, 60s, 70s, where some of it is outrageous, like feed a piano a bale of hay. When it's full, stop. And that's by Lamont Young, who's a very celebrated composer. There is the way in which you want your idea to kind of appear, live, however, whatever the function, or honestly even not function of how you want to think about sound or think about how that idea might appear on a page or not. I think that you can approach trying to define what the core thing that you are trying to express is, and being able to put that in something like a text to your friend, like a doodle. I think all of these things kind of get normally pushed into the idea of a pre-compositional process, but I think that when you kind of revisit that over and over and over again through writing a piece, you're able to kind of constantly deal with the inner voice in your head that says, is this good enough? I'm on bar 65, bar 14, I don't know about that one, so maybe everything after bar 14 sucks. That's not true. When you're able to kind of figure out, okay, there's something weird about this one, what do I want here? I think I hear a lot of young composers talk about transitions being really, really difficult. I think when we think about what is a transition? How can that be expressed in X amount of ways? I think that then when you get back onto your score and you're actually this idea more wants a wiggle than it wants 30-second notes or something, then also you can put the wiggle. We are in a time where you can put the wiggle, and and honestly maybe it'll get closer to what you want. And so I think also kind of freeing the expectation of others from what you are trying to give to others is just a way to move forward.
I love that so much. And one of the reasons why I love these two composer humans here is because you're hearing the pieces that they want to write are pieces that invite us to participate and to engage our own creativity. And we as a society spend so much time accomplishing things that we could almost forget that we have a side that imagines things. So thank you for creating those opportunities for us. Yeah, another question?
Thank you.
Yes, great.
I'm kind of tall here. Interestingly enough, I followed two of you on the panel. Garrett, I remember your show back in a few years ago, and then when it abruptly ended, I was like, where did the show go? And I was really upset about it. And then Daniel, we both are from the same, well, he's from Margate. I'm a little further south in Miami. And I work for Miami Music Project, and actually I remember him being on the panel. But here's my question in reference to, I was really hurt, and probably still a little bit hurt. So maybe, Garrett, you might be able to help me out. I really composed this piece. I call it 3 Poems of Faith. And I used 3 poems. And during my years at Florida International University, I had this professor. I even took an extra class. I said, can you just have your group to just read it? And the professor, not to put him out there, I mean, he looked like me and sounded like me, and I was in his class, his conductor's class, and he never once even looked at that piece. And that was the most disingenuous thing, because for so many years, you know, you put your heart and your soul into it, and yeah, finale can only do so much, but you need a live human being to do the rest. What do you say to a person who, when you have this piece and you want the world to experience what it took for you to compose that piece and compose those ideas? That's my question.
I'll just say it quickly, but then I want you to. Is that okay? Yeah, please. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your vulnerability. The fact that you said you're still in pain. Everybody hear that? That's important. Allyship, right? Allyship. My father used to talk about the astral body before he died, April 22nd, 1:07 p.m., 2013. He always talked about flight, that the soul will not be restricted by my body. So you have to find your people, and they may not look like you or I, right? And there's something even wonderful about that. The journey of finding the people who will support your work with love and empathy and urgency. Everything you just said, I want to play your music now. And you have to find the people who can inspire others to build those types of communities. It's a loving act, and it requires a certain amount of effort. And identifying the people who will not only see you, but love what you're doing and want to find other people who will love what you're doing. You dig?
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, your question makes me think actually of the legacy of Florence Price. So we talk a lot about how she, you know, had so much success in Chicago, but the reality is, in those days especially, if your music wasn't being played on the East Coast, you weren't a composer. So we have letters that she wrote to the music director of, I believe, the Philadelphia Orchestra, just pressing and pressing and pressing on, you know, and you know her music was continuing to be ignored, but she didn't give up. So I think a part of it is certainly perseverance, just that spirit to not give up. And then on the pain sort of issue, you know, we're human beings and we have those emotions. What I have had to do for myself, you know, through my practices is to understand that centering my pain stifles not only my creativity but my ability to move forward. I think it's certainly important to not forget and to really feel the feelings that you have, but also to understand that there are so many that came before us who did the same thing and were able to overcome through that perseverance. And if they could do it, we certainly can as well.
Beautiful answer. It looks like we have time for one more.
Yes, there's one more question that I would like to ask from Hopin. Rima Deal said, how can public radio classical music stations better partner with institutions and composers to showcase new works and build new audiences for classical music, not always centered around Western culture?
My very quick answer is to understand that not everyone is going to go on this journey with us. You will have angry emails. You will have people saying, oh, why are you playing this? You know, you may even get fired from your job. But but at the end of the day, I think, and I think I said this on my previous panel, it's about courage, really understanding that no change has ever come without cost. For some of us, that cost is huge. For others, that cost is reading someone's snide remark on social media. But either way, you know, we have to stay focused on our vision and move forward no matter, you know, what happens along the way.
And I did want to say, I wanted, that is so beautiful. Melissa, you embody change. Not only ACO, but our orchestral field, our American culture, our international sense of who we are is being better served because of your brilliance and your vision. And I want to, and that was on full display today.
Thank you. I so appreciate it. And Garrett, you know, that moment gave you the opportunity to meet somebody else who would consider that to be a qualification. So, thank you. We're going to end here. I'm just going to say thank you to each and every one of you. I'm going to invite you to consider one thing as you leave this, which is, in every moment, try and figure out where the furniture is. And if you see something in the wrong place and you can lift it, pick it up. Thank you all so much.